Today we will talk about the revival of Luckin Coffee, but first, some context. Many of you know what Luckin Coffee is, the disgraced coffee empire that should have become the Starbucks of China. Luckin Coffee went from an aspiring coffee behemoth to the black sheep of the coffee industry overnight. The company Starbucks was afraid of once has fallen under hard times. Luckin Coffee has only itself to blame for faking its financial accounts. Luckin Coffee sold less coffee than what they claimed to have sold. This is a big no-no in the investing community. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. Luckin Coffee CEO was kicked out of the company. Luckin Coffee's stock price tanked. Its stock was delisted from the Nasdaq. China's top watchdog fined Luckin Coffee $9 million for lying to investors. The SEC was less forgiving, fining them $180 million to settle fraud charges and accounting irregularities. $300 million of fake coffee sales had to be removed from Luckin Coffee's accounting books. Obviously, the financial fraud took a toll on Luckin Coffee's stock price, which went from $50 a share to $1.30 per share, a dip it never completely recovered from since. The blue Luckin logo with a white stag became a sign of financial fraud for investors placing bets in a Chinese stock market. The only future Luckin Coffee had, as far as everyone was concerned, was to fade into obscurity like the lying infidel it showed it was. Investors had sipped enough of the bitter taste of Luckin Coffee. It was time to frequent another coffee chain, basically Starbucks, because where else can you go for overpriced coffee? Then everything changed when Luckin Coffee returned, stronger than ever. Investors were delightfully confused when they realized Luckin Coffee was doing the impossible. A year after the 2020 collapse of Luckin Coffee's stock price, Luckin Coffee's revenue doubled in 2021. Then it doubled again by the end of 2022, reaching over $2 billion in yearly revenue. Apparently, companies that fabricate coffee sales have a happy ending after all. After the bankruptcy, Luckin Coffee got a new CEO. Whoa. He was the man who would turn Luckin Coffee's fortunes around. Seeing how Starbucks was dominating the coffee market in larger cities, Luckin Coffee's new CEO decided to expand into smaller cities with penny-pinching customers. Previously, Luckin Coffee specialized in expanding their stores aggressively. Most of Luckin Coffee's stores have limited seating area anyway, focusing on pickup stores and places where customers and food delivery workers can pop in and out quickly. This lowers operating costs drastically, at least compared to their competitors, while selling drinks catered to the Chinese palate with recipes that change often to match trends and customer feedback that Starbucks could never try to replicate even with their region-specific menus. But well, Starbucks doesn't really have to adapt too much. They're Starbucks. They get customers by brand recognition alone. It made sense that once Luckin Coffee sorted out their mess, Luckin Coffee should expand their stores using the same aggression without falsifying sales this time. Luckin's target were the second-tier cities and below. This helped Luckin avoid competition from bigger brands with bigger pockets. Starbucks, Tim Hortons, and McDonald's McCafe tend to target first-tier cities where coffee drinkers are more common. To date, Luckin Coffee has opened more than 10,000 stores in China, a country that's expected to consume $140 billion worth of coffee per year by the year 2025. A market Starbucks agrees will become profitable enough to open 9,000 more stores by the year 2025. China's coffee market lags behind many countries and has room to grow dramatically. Luckin Coffee has stepped up its efforts to expand outside of China too, through its push to Southeast Asian markets. Perhaps understandably, Luckin Coffee's stock price has risen rapidly. They still haven't reached the heights they were at before, but they're more than halfway back at their previous peak. Not everything is sunshine and rainbows for Luckin Coffee though. Investors who were burned by Luckin Coffee's fiasco years ago have fresh scars that haven't healed. Investors are not as excited as they once were to invest in Luckin Coffee stock. Investing in a foreign company that has a history of fraud is a tough sell. Also, China isn't really a hot destination for investors like it used to be. China's economy is slowing, jobs are harder to come by now, and China's future buying power is shriveling up because not many are choosing to make babies anymore. It's the same problem Japan is facing. Luckin Coffee is also battling demons from its controversial past. past. Remember Jenny? You know that CEO and founder of Luckin Coffee who inflated coffee sales and so she was kicked out? Well, she's back with her co-founder Charles. The duo, not satisfied with fooling customers once, has returned with a vengeance. Jenny started a new coffee chain in China called Luckin Coffee near the end of 2022 last year. Half of the Luckin Coffee's core team are former Luckin employees who had insider experience back at Luckin Coffee. Luckin Coffee has taken everything they learned from their Luckin Coffee days and copied them to a T, from pricing to products. If you enter a Luckin Coffee store, you'd think it was Luckin Coffee because of how similar the product offerings are. This is China after all. You can't avoid copying, especially when the founder of your own company literally created the strategy of your largest rival coffee chain. If there's something different between Luckin Coffee and Luckin Coffee, it isn't the two financial fraudsters with a black mark on their name sitting on the Luckin Coffee's board. It's the sheer aggressiveness of Luckin Coffee's expansion. They're also offering coffees at prices cheaper than Luckin Coffee. Jenny and Charles have taken it upon themselves to double down on the frantic store expansions they used to do while they were at Luckin Coffee. Within 5 months of launching Luckin Coffee, despite the difficulties in finding investors because they defrauded investors in a past life, despite fighting with larger coffee chains and their old company turned competitor Luckin Coffee, despite everything, Jenny and Charles managed to do the impossible. They opened 1,000 coffee shops within 5 months. For context, Luckin Coffee needed 11 months to open 1,000 stores nationwide. Starbucks was slower to open 1,000 stores. They needed 16 years. It just goes to show Jenny and Charles never needed to commit financial fraud in the first place. God knows why they did it. If they had stayed at Luckin Coffee, perhaps they might be ahead of both Starbucks and Tim Hortons. Well, Luckin Coffee is technically China's largest coffee chain right now, so it is already bigger than Starbucks in China. Imagining just how much bigger and crazier the coffee chain could have been is a scary thought experiment we will never need to have. Luckin Coffee's future seems brighter than ever. Perhaps one day it will regain its old valuations when investors forget the crimes it committed back in the day. I hope you liked the video. Leave a like if you did and subscribe if you haven't already. It's much appreciated.